I'm going to introduce our first panelist, Maureen James. Maureen manages the Community Investment Program at the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, which funds innovative community internet projects to build a resilient, trusted, and secure internet for all Canadians. Her organization has recently released a report titled Unconnected, Funding Shortfalls, Policy Imbalances, and How They Are Contributing to Canada's Digital Underdevelopment. I will let Maureen provide us with the key findings of this report and introduce us to our other two amazing panelists of today, Doug Gore of OTF and Shelley Robinson of National Capital Freenet. So now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our panelists. Over to you, Maureen, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Ines. As Ines mentioned, I'm Maureen James, and I do manage the Community Investment Grants Program at the Canadian Internet Registration Authority. I'm very excited to see the diversity of people that are joining us today. And I am also very keen to know that, yes, maybe digital is somewhere on that long list of things that you're thinking about. Today, we're going to try to push that up and tell you why it's important to connect it to the other work that you're doing. So to get us started, I would like to say that there are three things that we're going to cover this afternoon in this conversation. The first thing is, as Ines mentioned, we at CIRA have looked into digital funding in Canada. We would like to share with you the results of our discovery into into the digital funding landscape in Canada. At the same time, we want to see how that situation, the digital funding situation in Canada, is playing out at the community level. So I will bring Shelley Robertson, Executive Director of National Capital Freenet, into the conversation for that piece. And then we're going to round it out. The third thing we're going to look at is the urgent need for funding for digital initiatives in Canada, and the need for philanthropy to step up and contribute. And so for that, we have Doug Gore from Ontario Trillium Foundation to talk about a very interesting and I'd say innovative initiative that he's leading or part of. So we'll speak about all of those three things this afternoon. The first thing I'd like to tell you about is CIRA, the Canadian Internet Registration Authority. We, as our #1 job, manage .ca for Canadians. And what that means is, when you're typing into your computer pfc.ca to get to this event, we run all of the underlying invisible technological systems that get you from that keyboard typing to the exact website authoritatively and securely. So we do that for over 3 million .ca websites across Canada, and that's our 24/7 job. That's our main reason for being. We also do cybersecurity services and have some free offerings that we give to Canadians, one of them called Canadian Shield, which allows you to protect your home computer systems from the evil things that can come your way on the internet, so that we are very concerned about ensuring a trusted internet for Canadians. That's our mission. We are a not-for-profit organization. We're not a foundation. So, but what we are able to do as part of our mission, as part of our DNA, is we are able to set aside funds each year to grant to community-led internet projects. And that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about today. We run an annual grants program. The focus of it is 4 different funding areas. We have infrastructure, digital literacy, cybersecurity, and community leadership. And on March 2nd this year, we'll be opening the call again for the 8th year to receive project applications from nonprofit organizations, registered charities, and academics. You can apply for grants up to $100,000. And the priority that we're looking for in terms of who benefits from the grants, our priorities are rural, Indigenous, and Northern communities and students. So those are our focus areas. And I bring attention to those because I think this grants program and those focus areas are a very important part of the conversation about where digital philanthropy is needed in Canada today. So I mentioned we've been running this program for 8 years, and there's a couple of things that we know. We know that our grants program is not huge. It's actually pretty small compared to the needs. So we fund just over $1 million each year in projects. But we also know that the demand is so huge, we only fund in the neighborhood of about 15% of the applications that we receive each year. So the demand is huge. Our piece of the pie is pretty small. And so one of the things we wanted to know that we didn't know is, where do we fit? Where does CIRA's granting program fit in the overall landscape of the funding that is available for digital initiatives in Canada? What are the size? What is the scale? What are the funding needs? And what we discovered was there was no research. So we said, okay, we said this last year, we're going to do this ourselves. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the findings, the top level findings, just so you get a sense of what we heard. And then we'll dig in with Shelley and Doug into how that plays out in real life. So I'm just going to share this. How about this? Share. Okay. There we go. So I think Ines referred to this in the introduction. This is the world's longest report name. And there's a reason for that. So we called it Unconnected, the report that we produced. Unconnected, funding shortfalls, policy imbalances, and how they are contributing to Canada's digital underdevelopment. Partly because if you don't read anything else, you kind of hear everything you need to know right there in the title. We have funding shortfalls, serious policy imbalances, and Canada is digitally underdeveloped. I will take you through a bit more than that though. So we worked with an external research firm. We brought them in to help us look into the question of understanding funding needs for internet-related projects in Canada. And what we did was, starting last April, so COVID had already started, we had them undertake 50 in-depth telephone interviews, a quantitative survey of 65 respondents who followed up their findings from the telephone interviews. And then when we were putting the report together, we did on-the-record interviews to really bring the stats and the data and the experience of digital funding in Canada to life. Who we spoke to was civil society, so registered charities, nonprofits. We spoke to academia, representatives of Indigenous communities, some funders, some social enterprise, and some government. For us, it was kind of the very large community that we've been interacting with over the last several years in digital funding and digital initiatives. So those kind of leaders, people that were kind of right in the thick of things, and that's who responded. One of the things that we found for ourselves, and we know that you're probably experiencing it even now, when people say digital philanthropy or digital development, what are they even talking about? So as part of our exercise, we found this kind of uncharted territory. So we even had to do our own defining for ourselves. So I thought I'd share with you some of the terms that we have started using in this discourse. Digital development, for us, that boils down to really what you need to do to get to digital equity for all Canadians. So that can be funding, investments in access and capacity, as well as supporting the ecosystem of engagement in policy development in this country. So digital development comprises all of those things. Right now, we would say that we are digitally underdeveloped in most of those areas. The other thing that we had a hard time, especially when we were trying to design questions to talk to our survey participants, was what do we even call this grouping of things that are digital literacy, infrastructure, connectivity, all these different kinds of initiatives. So we decided to label them internet-related projects, which in a way probably makes them feel a bit distant from all the social change work that many of us are involved in, but it was just a way for us to describe this so that when we were having conversations, we can have short form ways of referring to things. And what did we find? Digital development problems begin with funding. Funding is scarce for internet-related projects. It's very difficult for people to find. 45% of our respondents said finding funding was very difficult to access, and some described it as a constant struggle. Probably not a huge surprise, but it's good to kind of have a sense of how people are feeling about it. Then we asked our interviewees and survey participants to tell us what are the key funding priorities in Canada right now. Where are the gaps? Where does attention and funding really need to go to? And so what they identified were three main areas: digital literacy for 43%, infrastructure for 32%, and 12% for community leadership. And you think, well, community leadership, 12%, why are we even highlighting that? What we found in follow-up conversations with people during the research was that community leadership wasn't top of mind, but it was the thing that made other things possible. So community leadership to us means being able to engage in the conversations, the decision-making, the policy-making, helping people understand what's at stake in how the internet is deployed in Canada. And then it helps to unlock the other areas, so infrastructure and digital literacy. So we really see it as a multi-needs overlapping of all of these different funding areas. So those were the priorities that came through. In terms of actually getting funding, so for those organizations that were actually able to get their hands on funding, they still found limitations. 71% of respondents cited a lack of funding for long-term projects and initiatives. Funding is almost always on an ad hoc per project basis. Core funding is nearly non-existent. Sierra knows this particularly well because we do project funding. But for organizations that are working on the front lines, that are trying to change policy or build citizen engagement in how the internet works in Canada, you need more than project funding. You need longer term funding for sustained initiatives to actually do that kind of awareness raising and policy advocacy. So the sustainability of funding was a key issue for organizations in Canada. So how does this play out? With all of those priorities not being met, we end up with some difficult situations. We have poor or no internet access in low income, remote, northern, Indigenous communities, rural communities. There's a stat that is fewer than 1/3 of households on Indigenous community reserves have basic internet access. And the government has defined a level of basic internet access, and fewer than 1/3 of households in Indigenous communities have that. 63% of rural communities also do not have that level of basic internet access. So people are unconnected. The other thing that happens if you can't engage in how your internet is happening in your country, you find that services are very expensive. Canada has some of the highest rates in the world for internet access. And the way that plays out is you find out that there's 11% of households in our country that have no internet access at all. So lack of affordability is playing into that. And we have one of the organizations that we've worked with, Acorn, did research about 1.5 years ago that showed, so pre-COVID, that 1/3 of low-income families had to choose between food and internet just so that they could get their lives done and do the things that they needed to do. Now that COVID's happened, kids schooling from home, people working from home, those decisions I'm sure are even much harder. The other thing that happens is you end up with a lot of Canadians that are missing out on access to digital skills and learning how to use the internet safely and effectively. Seniors are largely cut off in many communities, as well as people that just don't have access to the devices and the technology. So there's a lot of digital literacy skills gap that you face in this scenario. And finally, civil society groups that are struggling to push for change in how the internet works in Canada, because there's not very little funding for that, that is kind of creating or perpetuating the conditions that we've been seeing in Canada's digital underdevelopment. The end result of all this, the digital divide you've heard about. Many Canadians are effectively unconnected and therefore increasingly left behind by the digital economy. We also end up with a policy imbalance because government is making policy decisions based largely, if not solely, on input from industry and not from citizen participation. So that's where our call comes from. The most important funding area you've never heard of, we're calling it digital philanthropy. We think we need to create a tradition of digital philanthropy here in Canada, and that's what we're here to talk with you about today, the whys and the hows. But to us, digital philanthropy means grants, funding, resources from any source with anybody who has resources that can contribute to a broad range of internet-related projects infrastructure, connectivity, access, digital literacy, cybersecurity projects, and public engagement in how digital technologies are deployed and governed in Canada. So that's kind of a quick rundown of the high level of our research results. The URL is available and you can go and connect to take a look. I'm going to stop the sharing now of that sort and start the sharing with my co-panelists. I think what I'd like to do is roll another poll, the one about how people may be experiencing some differences, the question number 2 we have. So when that one comes up on the screen, I will then begin my conversation with Shelley. So the next question is, have you or the organizations you work with seen an increased demand from groups you work with for digital access, digital service delivery since the start of the pandemic? And Shelley, while we're waiting for those poll results to come in, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about first you and NCF, what you do there?
Sure. So National Capital Free Net, or NCF, we're based in Ottawa. We're a not-for-profit internet service provider that is also committed to digital equity. So in our case, that means we want all of our members to have access to internet that they can afford, that is high quality, that they understand how to use, and that they feel safe online. So that's kind of the 4 pillars of what we do. So right now we are through a CRTC mechanism, we buy wholesale internet from Bell. So we offer DSL internet up to 50 meg. And now pretty soon we're adding cable internet, which is from Rogers on this side, Videotron on the other side, because we also offer, so we serve the entire National Capital Region. So we have about 5,000 members because we also provide other digital equity services. So we have free locally hosted email. We do some basic web hosting. We have a lot of community workshops that touch on the digital literacy piece that you were talking about. We have worked, for instance, with Acorn on a project, so with some very low-income folks, teaching them online skills so that they could access underused government subsidies that they could apply online. We also actually had a CIRA-funded event called Digital Access Day in 2018, which spoke in a kind of advocacy way to these kinds of issues more broadly.
So to me, it sounds like you're hitting all the boxes, like all the different kinds of areas that the digital underdevelopment is, well, that we're concerned with. And I was wondering, when you saw the report come out, did it resonate? Like, I know you were one of the people that might have been involved in, you know, answering questions, et cetera, but the final result, did what you saw in the Unconnected report, how did that play out for you at NCF?
Yeah, it rang all of our bells. One of the things that I will say is, and this came very much to the fore, I think we felt it, but when we did Digital Access Day, it really came to the fore, which was, and I'm sure everybody knows this, but like the digital divide mirrors existing social inequities and in fact, of course, exacerbates them. So it's not just this kind of standalone issue, but it's really like a through line through all kinds of social issues. So we have a special program right now for Ottawa community housing tenants. And so when we had a lower cost program, folks are coming in to connect, but we also then see the additional digital literacy needs. And then we can also see some of them don't have devices. And then, you know, so yes.
Rang some bells. And we got our poll results in, and they said that 94% of people participating in the poll did see an increase in demand for services digital service delivery, digital programming, et cetera. How has the kind of before and after of COVID hit NCF?
Yeah, it's really stark. So we had a 30% jump in usage almost overnight. So that was a big deal. It also meant that we had a bunch of price pressures. So a lot of ISPs in the market had to raise their prices, including us. We try really hard to keep our prices low, but also sort of to not do a lot of increases. So that was a big one. We saw a lot of folks who needed higher speeds because suddenly the kind of usage that they were undertaking, for instance, suddenly doing video conferences makes a huge difference to people's needs. So one of the things we talk about internally is, yes, there are the unconnected, but there's also the underconnected. So folks who through either affordability or straight up like access can't get to the higher speeds they need to sufficiently engage. So we saw that a lot. One of the things that we made a lot of provisions for people who might need support to pay over longer periods of time. And we set up like a payment plan option, a more formalized version of what we had. And we haven't seen as much people taking advantage of that as we think. And I absolutely think that it's the acorn effect. I think that people are trading their food or other necessary expenses so that they can stay connected. It has become so crucial. So we have people who under really pretty restrictive lockdown conditions are very anxious to make sure that they pay their bills on time so that their internet doesn't get cut off. So the sense of internet as a lifeline has been underscored over and over again. Yeah.
I think you said to me in a conversation a little while back about how we just kind of flash forwarded about 10 years in
100%.
Can you say that again? Because it was good. I'm terrible at repeating these things.
Yeah, so digital adoption. So I tend to use my mother-in-law as an example here. So she's 83 and she had an internet connection and she used it pretty much only for email. And then overnight, she was no longer able to access her faith services. And so she switched to doing an online format, which meant that all of a sudden she needed a new computer. We ended up getting her a tablet. Her speed wasn't enough. Her capacity wasn't enough. All of that changed and her own skills leapfrogged so that now she can use Zoom. On the other hand, it meant that there are lots of things she jumped over. So there was a digital literacy gap where she's able to use this higher thing, but she's not sure about how to do that securely, and she has a lot of anxiety around it. But definitely it pushed things so much forward. Yeah.
So if you were to pick, I don't know, one or two things that like absolutely, if you could get funding tomorrow, if you could get the project figured out, what would be those things? Oh, look at that.
So yes, if I could get funding tomorrow. So we have a thing that we're actively trying to move forward, and COVID actually has made it, I think, more interesting to funders. So we have a community mesh project that we want to do. Without getting into the technical details, it would provide both public Wi-Fi and then apartment-based Wi-Fi. And we would do that in partnership, ideally with Ottawa Community Housing. So it would be tapping. And so it's a higher speed. It's a reliable service. It would be a secure service. And it's at a much lower cost because it takes us outside of the regulatory processes that drive up our costs. And for us, a big part of that, my background is in community radio. So I kind of come with that DIY community owned infrastructure model. So a community mesh also means that folks from those communities can then train up on how to do installations and servicing and strengthen their own skills. So there's the digital literacy of teaching people like how to work their computers. There's also the digital literacy of like teaching people how to chart a community path forward with digital equity in mind. So that's a big one. Another one would probably be like a huge push around digital literacy. So we haven't been able to do as much as we would like around, I would actually say in this case, seniors, but I tend to stretch the definition of seniors and those who also need these skills who might not have them for helping people engage with kind of video conferencing services. So like, how do they use them, but how do they set them up if they want to, start something with their friends or family? So like a much more kind of broader push to help get our members and other folks in the community forward on that. So those would be the two. So one is like a kind of infrastructure, and then the other one very much on digital literacy.
All right, well, we have someone right here who's all ears, I'm sure, on these kinds of questions. Before I get to you, Doug, I want to throw out the two poll questions that are remaining. Do you currently fund digital initiatives in Canada? So these ones are to funders, but to the foundations in the audience. Do you currently fund digital initiatives in Canada? And then our follow-up one is about, is understanding digital holding you back from funding digital initiatives? So let's see where we go with that. Do you currently fund digital initiatives in Canada? That's sad, actually. I miss Alex Trebek.
Yeah, a great Canadian icon.
Okay, any results yet? Do you fund digital initiatives in Canada? We have 46% saying yes, 20% saying no, 34% saying not applicable. That makes sense. So we've got some people in the room that are actually funding towards digital. That's exciting. And then our second follow-up question is there anything about understanding digital that's holding you back from funding digital initiatives? Is it an obstacle to your ability to fund in this area? Yes, no, NA. Very interested to see the results of this poll. And the survey says yes, 44%, no, 26%, NA, 29%. So Doug,
Yes, Maureen.
You're among friends here. Can you tell us first, I've heard a little bit about your background. I understand that you don't come from a digital background. You come from a sports background, and you've landed on the planet of digital transformation, leading it. How did you get here?
Well, I wake up and ask myself that exact question every single day, Maureen, and your guess is as good as mine. Yeah, my background is actually sport, 30 plus years in sport, and somehow I wake up every day and work in a bunch of fields that I know nothing about. So again, my name is Doug Bohr. I work at the Ontario Trillium Foundation, and I have worked at the Trillium Foundation for about a minute. I have been a grant maker. I've worked on a strategy around our grant system and knowledge mobilization. Now I work on a team, which is the segue to this, a partnership investments team, which I credit our senior leaders for making this program a couple of years ago, which is really about the capacity of the sector and supporting with infrastructure those important capacity building pieces that we need that we know are required in the sector for people to fulfill their mandate. So our team, the team that I work on at Trillium, works with other funders and the community to kind of build that infrastructure and figure out what is required. And that's how I end up coming to this work. And Maureen, you've been in enough meetings with me to say that I usually start these things, and I will with the community. They say, I know nothing about technology and digital. I really am. I am the Luddite at Trillium. I have recently learned how to bold things in Word. So I come to this with very little knowledge, which you would think would be a negative. But the way I look at it, and in some of the work that we're doing with some partners that we'll get into later, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Yes, I often have to educate myself or be educated by really smart folks that are out there, like Shelley and others that are in the community doing it. But it also allows me and us to come to the work with a certain humility that we don't have the answers, which is not always the case with funders, right? So it does allow me to come in and genuinely say, I don't know, right? So we listen, we learn, and take our cue from the community in how to best support the work they are doing because they are doing the work. So that's how 30-year sport guy ends up doing this work. And it has been a fascinating ride. It's really only been 8 to 10 months, I guess, that I've been working in this field, and it has been eye-opening. I just want to pick up on something that Shelley said. One of the things that has really occurred to me is whether it is this or some of the other fields that we work on our team in data and access to capital through social finance and other things, is the through lines are there, right? The inequities, the systemic inequities are the same, regardless of what the topic is. And to Shelley's point, our work and some of the work that we've found out about over the last little while, it has been punctuated by COVID, but they're decades old issues. So I wanted to thank Shelley for bringing that up, and that's what we found too. So, but there are.
So Doug, I have another question for you.
Yep.
You are part of a collaborative now. And the questions I have for you is like, how did this land in your lap? How did OTF end up taking the initiative on this? Because I think that's what happened. But
well, to be honest with you, Maureen, it was a kind of an organic, informal thing. And that when the world blew up last year, these were informal chats with folks that we know, frankly, the people that I'd worked with, and various other things. Kind of responding to or thinking about how do we respond to what we're hearing. Some of the data that you talked about, some of the things that Shelley saw, the 30% uptick immediately overnight that Shelley had to deal with, and what we saw with ONN surveys and Imagine Canada surveys and other things. So we knew that there was this these kind of immediate needs, and it really started with informal conversations with folks that I knew that say, hey, what's kind of happening at what's happening, RBC is one of our partners, what's happening with your youth fund, right? And so it started with that, and we saw this common theme that was kind of running through of people having to pivot immediately and deal with it, and the digital piece was a really big piece. So it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was intentional by any stretch of the imagination. We kind of fell into this, and I think if I'm honest, we probably thought that we were going to make some shorter term, smaller investments that would get us through COVID. Well, duh. Then you get into it for 5 minutes and realize these are decades old issues that are complex and interconnected. And we were into it and realized that there was far more work to be done here.
And so when you say you're into it, you have a thing, like there's a group, is there any kind of, do you have any clear description of that yet, or is it uncharted territory?
Of course not. Maureen, you know me well enough to know that clear is not my thing. But yeah, so what we have is we have a coalition of groups that we kind of have a working name called Technovate, coined by Mark Beckles from RBC. But there's ourselves, the Trillium Foundation, there's Community Foundations of Canada, RBC, IBM Canada, and Canadian Tire Jumpstart. So while we kind of form a steering committee or whatever it is, in the last 8 months, we've really leaned on probably 60 or 70 other organizations and people from around Canada, and frankly, some in the US and the UK as well, to start to learn about some of these topics. So what I would say is Technovate is this kind of loose association of people with these 5 groups that kind of come together, and we say, the point of it is to accelerate the digital transformation of the charitable not-for-profit sector in Canada. Big, hairy, audacious goal. What do we mean by that? We're not sure. We're still figuring that out. We need to lean on really smart people out there in the community that do this. And there are people that have been doing this in Canada for a long, long time. But that's kind of what the goal is to accelerate this digital transformation that the research and organizations like ourselves and others tell us needs to happen. So that's kind of what we're doing.
So Shelley, when you hear about this kind of thing coming together, what do you think?
So it's very exciting. I will say we have had some success, and this is, I think, a credit to funders and some of their flexibility. So we have been able to get funding that is not earmarked for digital things. It's earmarked for other things, but we obviously bring a digital spin. And so we've been able to make that work. But that has limitations. And so knowing that funders are addressing, and this goes 2 ways. So organizations like us, which are addressing social inequities through a digital lens kind of exclusively as our thing, is good to know. It's also good to know that organizations who don't seem technical, but are doing de facto technical work by now the delivery methods of what they're doing, will also be able to access that kind of funding. So I think it's good. So it doesn't, I also think people can be reassured that it's not like a small group of digital only organizations are going to access this funding. This is everybody now, so I think that it will really, I think it's going to make for some significant change in a way that can really sort of, move the needle. Yeah.
If I can too, Maureen, I think that's one of the things that we've learned, or that I've learned, is that digital transformation has nothing to do with technology, right? Like there's technology adoption, which is very different from digital transformation, which is about your organization and business practices and the way we communicate and all of those kinds of things. And frankly, I didn't really think about that a year ago. But it is very clear that digital transformation is not a technological, piece to whatever it is that you do. It really is kind of it's not that technology and the access to technology and connectivity and things isn't important, because that is a big piece of it. But it's not the same as digital transformation. And there's really smart people that have been talking about this for a long, long time, which we continue to learn from. So again, that's the thread that runs through, right? That we talk about. It is about the whole sector. It's not about a technology piece. And it can't be, to me, what we've learned is it can't be bolted on, right? Like it's not just something that you're kind of doing your core business and, oh, here's like $20 to buy some software, right? That ultimately is kind of not going to work. It's the full spectrum of things that need to happen. You talk about digital literacy, Shelley. We did some work and had a session somewhere else, and we did a quick poll as well too. And what we found about the not-for-profits, a lot of the not-for-profits that we were serving is for the most part, a lot of the organizations themselves had access to hardware and software, and in most cases, connectivity, decent connectivity, not great in some areas, but what they really lacked was the digital literacy. That has come out as the major piece of the skills that we're not supporting, right? And so yeah, that's some of the things that we are starting to find out and learn and leverage the knowledge of others to address.
Yeah, I would love to jump in on what you just said, Doug, because last week, I heard the CEO of Community Foundations of Canada say something that I was like, that's it, it's so simple. She said, digital infrastructure is social infrastructure. It's kind of going, what's first, right? We all have social change objectives, and how we get there, that's kind of the other piece. But I think if funders understand the connection between digital equity and social justice, we've really come far. And I think no matter what, if your number one issue is racial justice or youth mental health or climate change or poverty in your community, your second issue has to be digital equity so that people can engage in the work that you're doing and they can benefit from it. The work is happening online. You need to be able to bring in. And if we've got digital equity, all of those other things are going to be more straightforward, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I think that's it. The reality is, let's call it what it is. We live in a digital age, right? The way we consume things, the way we communicate, the way we offer our services and our programs and our products. Increasingly in the last year, we've seen the way we educate or don't educate our youth. It is incumbent upon us that there's this basic level of digital literacy and structure that allows our organizations and them then to be able to service their audience. So it goes right down to the individual level as well too, right? Like my mandate is the infrastructure and the organizations, but there's that necessary community-based piece too that we need to do. So I think it just, and I've had some conversations in the last, few months where people actually talk about it being a basic human right, that digital literacy and the way that our world works now is a critical human right. So as funders, as philanthropists, as whatever you want to call it, recognizing that is an implicit piece that is not a nice to have, it is fundamental to the way that we now operate, it only makes sense that we would invest in that.
If I can just jump in. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, no, go ahead, Shelley, please.
I was just going to say, I think the predominance of kind of digital and digital uptake and how, everyone has a smartphone. And so I also think that this is a good opportunity for us to kind of, in the way we've been talking about, challenging the idea that everyone has something. So we live in this digital world and we have a default where we're like, everyone is connected. And in a lot of our own lives, it's like we're talking and we don't notice the gaps of those who aren't connected. So we recently did a survey with some folks in Ottawa community housing, and 27% of them just didn't have connections at all. 27% is a huge amount. Now, it was a small survey, but that, And if you only have a cell phone that's connected and you're on a data plan, so how does that, so they're connected, but what does that mean? So yeah, I think this is a really big opportunity to extend everyone to be sort of full, true digital participation.
Yeah, it's interesting, Shelley. I think we chatted about this the other day, but I heard somewhere in my discussions over the last little while too, talking about in the times of COVID, and somebody had a great initiative with people who are homeless. and getting them devices so that they could kind of fully participate, but then kind of got into this work, and forgive me if anybody's on the line that did this, I'm probably not painting a clear picture, but so people had devices, but then the places where they would go to power their devices, they couldn't get in. So again, they're not only unconnected, they're underconnected, to use your phrase, right? So that has been, you know, again, for us, as we continue to learn every day, this coalition of the steering committee and the broader group that we have, is it is impossible to look at the digital issue without looking at the systemic inequities in our communities. They can't be separated. So how we do that, I'm not sure, but it's kind of a fundamental principle on which we're trying to base our work as well too.
So thinking a little bit farther ahead, how do you think organizations working on these things can best support each other? Like, what's missing from the landscape right now? We've got an awareness that started, some initiatives that are cooking up. What else do we need? What else do we need? That's to both of you.
Okay. Okay. So again, this is just my observation, being the sport guy in the room, but I would say we don't have a culture of kind of equitable digital access, or whatever you want to call it. We don't, it's not a thing in Canada. And I think until such time that it becomes a thing, like it has with you know, our friends in the US or the UK, where you know, the digital capacity it has been identified as a critical piece of their society moving forward. We haven't really done that in Canada. So until such time that the big missing piece for me is the full recognition that it's a thing, and the ecosystem that comes along with that. Obviously, the investment that is a necessary piece of that to me is kind of that's the holy grail, right? Culture change is hard, and to me, that's the piece that I think is missing and we need to work on.
I think that's really interesting, because what I'm feeling from our members lately is, in addition to the work that we do to provide the service and to provide the digital literacy, they want us to do more work around digital advocacy. So trying to change some of the structural factors that perpetuate these problems. And so that could be kind of a CRTC piece, that could be a government piece. There are, you know, other elements there. And there are some organizations like Open Media doing great work in this space. So and I think this was addressed by Maureen's comments about the funding. So advocacy and funding some advocacy, I think, is a piece. We could certainly, you know, use some of that funding. There are other organizations that could use this work. So that's that kind of, how do we change things at that policy level, I think is really significant. And then for us, the other piece is, as a social enterprise, it's like trying to provide the service. Sometimes, quite often, and again, this was addressed by Maureen's comment about the report, the funding that we get for kind of the digital literacy things are what we tend to call our mandate-driven things, although we also think providing the service is part of the mandate, but are on the edge of our desk. So it's project-based, it's 1 year, and when you apply for funding, you never get as much as you hope to get. So you tend to sort of chip away at your budgets. And so for us to be able to, my colleague had this really good graph of, like, you know, a Venn diagram. And right now we have kind of 3 main circles, and our circles are all separated. And I think what we would like from the support from funding is an integration of those ideas, so that there is an advocacy piece, there is a digital literate piece, and there is an infrastructure piece, and that they can serve each other rather than having to kind of compete both for time, energy, resources. Yeah.
100% agree. And I think it's something we've learned, and it's not unique to this topic. I think often as investors, and I think it's more than philanthropy. Like, when I think of philanthropy, I think of kind of traditional foundations, whatever, right? But it's also private sector and public sectors, right, too, who are massive investors in this field. I think we tend to do one thing or the other, right? Like, let's do skills, or let's do tech, or let's do whatever or whatever. The reality is, we need investment across all of those things, or we're not going to get there. We can't. My opinion is, we're not going to be able to do it one organization at a time. We need to invest in one organization at a time, but we also need to invest in the broader infrastructure that supports the whole thing to have an ecosystem that's actually going to move forward. And I do want to pick up on what you said too, Shelley. It has been a pleasure to meet the incredible number of people across Canada that actually are doing this work and have been doing it for a long time that I didn't know about because it wasn't my field or whatever. And the easiest place to start, and what our coalition's now kind of talking about, is start with the people that are already doing this and scale what they do, right? Like there are lots of folks, yourselves and First Nations Tech and open media and all kinds of really smart people doing this that just can't scale because they don't have the resources to be able to scale. And so I think, for me, the totality of it, it's such an important issue because it is implicit the way that we're going to operate in our society that it needs investment at all of those levels. So for me, it's now being purposeful and intentional about investing in it. I don't know how to say it any more plain than that.
I think the sector-wide, that's the part I also want to underscore what you said there. I think the idea that there shouldn't just be one or two banner organizations that are doing the work, but that, across level, and so that could be smaller and bigger and medium-sized organizations. And so I think that will involve formal and informal collaboration and amplification of the work. So yes, big ups to that.
No problem. Anybody want to talk about soccer? That's more my thing. But no, it is. I really appreciate that, Shelley, because I think it was, like I said before, I think when we, at least the partners that I'm working with, when we first got into it, I'm not sure we grasped the enormity of what this is and how it is tied to the social structures that are in our society and how it is kind of like I do now think of it as a basic human right. And 8 months ago, I wouldn't have, right? So it does need investment at all levels, big and small. Let's face it, there's a spectrum of need and opportunity, and what one organization needs in order to fulfill it and get to their, support the people that they support is not the same as one other organization. So we can't have one or two solutions. We need a million different solutions. And how do we build that? Changing culture, right? And investing in smart people and building what doesn't already exist. I don't know what that is yet, but I'm sure there's a cross-section of people across Canada that can tell us.
So I think we're just about to start Q&A. I'm going to try and slide one more point in.
Sure.
And that's also, again, we had this conversation yesterday. We were having a conversation with someone about this mesh project that we want to do, and they were talking about scale. I feel like this is a very popular topic in both tech and philanthropy, is how does this idea, replicable and repeatable scale. And for us, it's about the local piece is really significant. So I think, of course, there are, major national projects that can happen. I also think that there's a lot of, especially in the context of infrastructure, it's very community based. So you want the community participation, but there's a lot of like topographical challenges or geographical things that affect kind of connectivity or the way that you would deliver services in a given area. And I think making space for that. And then I also think idea sharing as a result. So there are projects that are happening in remote Indigenous communities. So there's a facilities-based, they're called Broadband Communications North. So they lay fiber in northern Manitoba to Indigenous communities. We absolutely have been talking to them to see what they're doing that we could do in a completely different technological way, but implementing some of their lessons. And so I think that's kind of making sure that there are localized responses is important.
Yeah, if I can just jump in on that, Maureen. Sorry, I know as we're trying to get the questions, but I think one of the things that we've grasped, we all tend, the group that I'm working with is fairly big, right? Like it's RBC and IBM and Canadian Tire and CFP. We're all big and whatever. But what we have learned from this is the local matters, and that's actually where the work is happening, and that's where the solutions are being found, and that's where they are relevant to that audience and dealing with their communities. So trying to figure out how we do that through engagement is super important, and also not putting ourselves at the forefront. Like we're not the leaders in this. We're here to support the good stuff that's already happening. So hopefully we can continue down that road and learn from all these people. That's another one that I actually didn't know about, right? Like I've had probably 100 one-on-one conversations with really smart folks across this country in the last year. And I learn every single day about these amazing organizations that need to be supported and scaled and or maybe not scaled, right? As to your point, maybe it needs to be within the context of whatever. So we hear you.
Let me jump in. Before we open the floor for questions, I have one question myself for all of our panelists. So we've been sort of setting the stage, demystifying the concept of digital philanthropy, putting the equity at the center of this conversation. How do you see how do you see the role of foundations within this? I mean, I understand from Maureen's presentation earlier that the main source of funding for this is public funding. So how do you see the role of foundations alongside public funding? And maybe I'll start with Maureen for this question.
I'd like to start with our other two, and then I'll do a little loop-de-loop at the end.
I guess as one of the other two. So I think, and as I would go back to, I'm not here to tell anybody what to do, right? Like I work for one organization and with a coalition of whatever, but I do think it goes back to the fundamental piece of the way that we invest in the groups and the communities that we invest in, and that this is just part of the work. It's not a nice to have anymore. So I'm not suggesting that people need to have a specific digital fund like ACIRA has. That's great if they do, if that's what they do. But what I would encourage people to do is, we talk about this all the time at our table, is stay in your lane, right? If you're investing in youth initiatives, or if you're investing in homelessness or whatever, think of the digital piece in the context of staying in your own lane, so that you're not, we talk about it with organizations all the time, like don't have mission drift, right? So it for me, it's that piece. And for those that choose to wade in, listen to the folks that Shelley's talking about around the country that are doing this amazing work. Like, learn from them, because the solutions are out there, the answers are out there. And finally, I would say, again, being purposeful and intentional about it. It can't be off the side of your desk. It can't be a bolt on. It can't be a nice step, a piece that we saw. We have to be intentional about it.
Thanks, Doug. Shelley?
That was very useful, because I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but now I do. And that is, I think Doug's advice about foundations, because I don't know about what foundations should do, obviously, other than, personally approach us for funding as a joke. But I think the idea of staying in the lane makes a lot of sense to me. And so what I would say is, let's say there is a digital first organization like us, or a Broadband Communications North, or whoever is doing this work, to see the digital opportunity in relation to your own lane. So I would never submit an application, for funding related to homelessness that didn't deal with homelessness at its core, but it might be a very technologically focused, obviously. So in the context of our community mesh work, maybe it's that we want to pop up an antenna on the roof of a shelter, and then we wanted to provide, public Wi-Fi access around the shelter, and then we would also have a digital literacy component, and then we would also have a device component. So it's very much got homelessness at its core and can speak to that knowledge that's within the organization. But obviously we're going to come from that technological perspective, and we're not trying to shoehorn what we're doing just to get the funding. It's really that we see the overlap between what we do and that subject area.
Maureen?
Sure. So I'm going to sort of address this to the people in the audience that were kind of like, well, I don't really know what this is, and I'm not sure I'm ready to go there yet. But I think we've kind of laid it out. There are priorities, there are needs, there are different aspects of it, whether it's digital literacy skills or policy advocacy. You know that there's a problem now if you didn't before. I'm pretty sure you probably knew. There's resources. We've got a report, which is one thing. It's about Canada, landmark research never done before. So you can refer to that. It's got great examples in it of what's needed and how people are dealing with things. And you've got great resources like Doug, like Shelley, like other organizations that are working in the field, and other funders that are doing the work. So I think getting informed would be the first piece. And we've started that here. And I think the other thing that I want to come back to, something that Doug said, is you don't have to be a digital transformation expert. You don't have to be somebody that knows all the guts of the technology. I mean, Shelley knows how to put that tower up. You don't have to actually know about that. What you have to know is that it's achieving that overall objective of helping with a homelessness issue or helping with a housing issue and a connectivity and a community development issue. That's what you're really good at. And the people that are proposing those technical solutions, they're good at those. Leave them to do that as long as their objectives are helping you get the community impact you want. So I keep sensing that there might be a bit of a fear factor around digital transformation, technology, integration into projects. And we're trying to say, don't worry too much about that, because the people who need to know that. And you just need to fund them to be able to do those things. And then my final bit is I'd love to go back to that piece of maybe fund the hardest piece first. If you're ready to fund, the policy advocacy work is probably one of the least kind of accessible pieces. It's harder to understand and you don't get an immediate result necessarily as you might with a workshop. All of the things are important. They are all important. But when you've got people that are on the front lines and organizations like NCF, National Capital Free Net, like Open Media, Acorn, First Nations Technology Council, there's a whole community of these organizations that are hanging on by a thread in a way that are trying to get the internet to be the digital equity internet that we want it to be. And they're probably the ones that are struggling the most for funding in this area. And they're just less seen and heard in a way. They're heard, but their needs are maybe not as clear as something concrete like digital literacy and skills. So that would be my suggestion, is of different ways to look at the problem. And I think we turn it over to you guys for questions.
Yeah, so one of the, there's a specific question for you actually, Maureen, so maybe we can start with that. The question is, who is missing from the funding ecosystem for internet related projects, and what kinds of funders would you like to see join the party?
Well, you know, even in this event, we've seen that there are probably more people that are engaging it in different ways than we even know about. So what I feel like is there's got to be some way, like we did the research on what community organizations are experiencing. I would love a picture of the donor landscape, like who's out there and actually doing this. That might be the next big thing that it would help us just know, because things are hidden. And I think there are, like, for example, Ontario Trillium Foundation with their Resilient Communities Fund, it sounds like a large piece of what you're seeing in all those applications are pivoting to digital for community service delivery. Those pieces are not ever really held up as digital funding, and yet it's there. So I think getting a sense of what we already have, like I know there's the Canada Council for the Arts Digital Strategy Fund. I know there's us, of course there's government, which is relatively out of reach for small groups. But what else is there? And I think there's a lot of corporate social responsibility funding that happens that is under the radar. There are some big programs, but a lot of them are under the radar or not characterized in a way that people would know right away, oh, we can get some digital support here. So I think if there are any ways to elevate that in how existing funding is presented or advertised, promoted. The other thing is, I think Canada's known for awesome tech development community. And I know that, there's a lot of different priorities, but it seems like there's such a connection between digital and digital. So that might be, can we invite them to the party in a new and different way? There's obviously lots of competing needs and people want to put their stake in the ground for different things, but that would be my take on it. But I'd love to hear if Shelley and Doug have something else to add.
Yeah, for sure. So I also tend to think, so first of all, too, I also think this is part of where it comes to investment in this is part of a broader conversation that's happening in philanthropy right now, generally about a lot of topics about the way we do things, right? To Shelley's point, right? Like, don't give me, $12 to do the digital project here, which isn't really related to the rest of your work, right? So I think the events of the last year have made us that are in the investment or the philanthropy community take a long, hard look at ourselves and the way that we do business, right? And we're hearing a lot of that. And so this conversation is happening anyway. But I also think we have a tendency to think of kind of the philanthropic sector and the not-profit sector and the private sector and the public sector when it's really one society, right? And so I think Can we change philanthropy? Absolutely, right? Like this is what we're trying to do, is to mobilize what already exists and add to that. And it's not just money, it's resources too, right? Like a lot of these places have massive resources, and there's a disconnect between, you know, organizations availing them because they don't know how and they don't have the skills and whatever, right? So I think there's a piece of that. But I also think, you know, philanthropy is one thing. Government is huge. Like it's massive, right? And they invest in they're the biggest investor in Canada, right? So we need to find a way to have that conversation. To Shelley's point, maybe that's the policy and the advocacy piece, right? That we need to invest in that piece as part of it, with them as a partner in all of this. Like we have to come as an equal partner in that relationship. Same with the private sector, right? Our coalition, our little coalition has a bunch of private, they are really genuine about their desire to do this. They come at it from a different perspective, but they're genuine. Like motivation matters. So I like to think of it as all the assets that we have, the money, the resources, the public, private, and not-for-profit sector kind of coming together to tackle it. Easier said than done.
Thank you, Doug. And actually, a lot of the questions raised in the Q&A box sort of link to what you have just answered. Shelley, actually, I'm just going to ask this question to you, not because I think you're a youth specialist, maybe you are, but so one of our attendees, funder, has a question about investing in, you know, funding computers, tablets, etc. Their area of interest and focus are children and youth. And so the question is really related to the risks, you know, that youth and children can encounter when actually equipped with those type of digital support and tools. Do you have any suggestions, insights on this?
What would I say? So I am not a youth specialist, but I do know that this is a concern that comes up a lot for our members, related to when children and youth get access and you know, I will give a shout out to CIRA. So they have the Canadian Shield product that is available individually to people to protect their computers, but they also have one that organizations can do that allows for DNS filtering, which does mean that you can restrict the access to certain kinds of sites on devices that access a connection that is connected through that system. So it's something that we had been checking out for ourselves to make available to our members, and it's opt-in, opt-out. So they could say, you know, I don't want anyone on our connection to have access to sites that deal with these areas, and they kind of deal with them as well as security threats. So there is that idea. I also think there's a lot of really good work, like Media Smarts, for instance, does a lot of good work on media literacy. And I do think sometimes we can focus on technological answers to technological problems, you know, so how do we restrict access? But I also think a huge component is just how do we teach people to sort of think about things, and so that they can approach them. And when they do, almost inevitably, unfortunately, come up with these things, they have the tools to be able to sort of to process them or, you know, deal with them appropriately.
Great. Thank you, Shelley. Any final thoughts before we conclude the webinar? Something that's a burning issue that you want to raise at the last 5 minutes of the webinar. Maureen, I am sure you have something to share.
Oh, you know, I just really think holding that connection between and understanding that connection between digital equity and social justice as the overarching point here is digital is not that far from everything else you want to do. It's really part of everything you want to do. And it's not that scary. So we're here to help. We're here to help demystify and help generate more resource mobilization towards these issues. And so if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to Sarah or any of the people I'm sure on this panel.
Great, thank you. Doug, any final thoughts?
Just, you know, it's an invitation to come and join us. And when I say us, I mean the broad coalition of folks that are doing this. Lots of them, like Shelley, have been doing this for far longer than I have. It's an open invite because we're learning as we go. We need smart folks that can show us the way. Our little group is trying to mobilize capital and mobilize resources to invest in the smart people. So if you're out there and you're interested, give me a shout. We're all ears. We want to learn from you and contribute to the good stuff that's already happening, and then build that which doesn't already exist.
Thank you, Doug. Julie.
So those are both really good points. So one is, I think, yeah, digital equity is social equity, I think is really an important takeaway. And then also speaking as an organization, I obviously can only speak for my organization, but I wouldn't want foundations to think that they can't approach us and ask us questions about, you know, the kinds of things we need, or technological questions without kind of, you know, like having a quid pro quo or whatever. We'd be happy to talk to people about what we think the sector needs, not just for ourselves, but also, you know, like as a sector, and what does that look like? And I also wonder, we sort of touched on this, but as foundations are wondering how to assess something, if they want to take that advice and stay in their lane, but there's a technological piece they don't understand, I think Doug's approach of reaching out to experts, maybe in the private sector, or, you know, other organizations, not the ones applying for funding, to sort of get the skinny on the details on the technological, so you can have some confidence that yes, this is going to work, and then you obviously know the piece that, you know, relates to your kind of your lane or your kind of main mandate. Yeah, so I think, yeah, not being scared, and that this is everything, and that this is addressing those core issues.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to all of our panelists today. Thank you to Maureen, who has helped put this in place. And really, I mean, I think that you have made a topic that doesn't necessarily appear very appealing, extremely interesting. And when you see who's actually working in this space with all these smiles, it's really a good, I think it's a good message that we're sending today. I just wanted to remind everyone that, so we do have a survey, a post-webinar survey that's going to pop up when you disconnect from the webinar. And next week, exceptionally, our webinar is at 12 noon Eastern time. We will have the pleasure of welcoming Senator Ratna Umidvar, Hillary Pearson, and Bruce McDonald from Imagine Canada to share with us the most recent developments of the charity sector reform. And so I just, again, thank you so much, Doug, Maureen, Shelley. It was really a pleasure. Thank you. And we will see you next time.